Hi, welcome to this online paper presentation about designing interactive scaffolds to promote reflection on peer feedback. I am Amy Cook from the University of Memphis, and my collaborators Stephen Dahl from UCSD and Jessica Hammer from Carnegie Mellon. We would like to thank NSF for funding this work. So first, why do we care about peer feedback? Feedback is an essential element for project-based learning. This is how students get the help they need to iterate their work. Teachers often use peer feedback exchange so that students can get more, fast, and diverse feedback than if the instructor was providing comments by themselves. Often, instructors will use technology like peer feedback systems to facilitate this exchange. We recognize that reflection is necessary for feedback to be a learning opportunity. If students ignore the feedback or blindly do what others tell them, they're not learning. But reflection is difficult for students, especially in a peer feedback situation when students get a lot more comments of varying quality on their work. So we analyzed existing peer feedback systems and what sort of support they provided for reflection, and we found two gaps. First, in general, systems support reflection for feedback providers, but not reflection for feedback receivers. Some minimal receiver support was given, which we discussed in the paper, but none of these were effective at helping students integrate feedback into their work. Second, in general, systems support reflection for individuals, but not reflection for teams. So our goal is to see if we can design reflection support for teams receiving peer feedback with a peer feedback system. So we decided to use the ICAP theory by McKee, which defines 4 types of learning activities to guide what kind of reflection support we would provide. So according to the theory, there are 4 types of learning activities: interactive, constructive, active, and passive. And from best to worst, interactive is the most effective. So an interactive activity requires that students create new knowledge together while interacting with their peers. So interactive reflection might be writing next steps collaboratively with your team as you discuss feedback. Constructive learning activities, which are the second most effective, require students to create new knowledge by themselves. So maybe you read the feedback and you write your own list of next steps individually based on the feedback. Active learning activities require that students take any action other than just sitting and listening. So for example, students might rate the helpfulness of each comment on 1 to 5 stars when they're going through their feedback. And then passive reflection or passive learning activities are just sitting and listening. We did not test passive learning, passive reflection in this study because we know it's not the most effective option for students. So we have 2 research questions. The first is to identify the challenges that students face when they're reflecting on feedback. And the second is to evaluate the design of these 3 reflection scaffolds that we made according to ICAP theory. So we were in a study. We were in 2 university-level game design courses. In these courses, students would present their game in progress at regular intervals throughout the course. They would come into class on demo day. One team would get up in front of the course and project their demo for the class. The instructors would provide verbal feedback after the demo, while the student audience would provide written feedback on index cards. And then after class, to participate in the study, teams would meet with a researcher to get their feedback, do the reflection protocol, and take a survey on the same day of class, so there was no delay for them in getting their feedback. So what actually happened in those reflection protocols? For the first 10 minutes, regardless of which condition you were in, students would read the feedback that they had provided and individually rate each comment 1 to 5 stars. So this rating activity is all that was necessary for the active condition. So for the rest of the time, the active team would just talk about whatever they wanted. But in the other 2 conditions, we used this 15-minute discussion period to vary what students did. So in the constructive condition, students needed to create new knowledge individually. So we had them write next steps by themselves before they talked with their team. In the interactive condition, we needed students to create new knowledge collaboratively, so we had them write next steps as a team after they had discussed. And then for the last 5 minutes, all students took a survey about open-ended questions about the protocol, their likes and dislikes, and Likert scale questions about their opinions on the peer feedback. We measured things like the quality of peer feedback, the quality of student reflection, student preferences, and team dynamics. The details of this are in the paper. So what did we find? First, we found that students are not great at identifying which feedback is good. So students tended to give better ratings to longer comments. They assumed that 3 sentences was better than 1. Second, experts had said that specific, actionable, and critical feedback were qualities that made feedback successful, but students did not give higher ratings to these higher quality comments. Instead, students looked for the most popular comments. In fact, they would sit there and count how many people had said each type of comment and use that to decide what to ignore. They would say, well, only one person said this, so we don't have to do it. Let's just throw that note card away. The second, we noticed that students would pay more attention to the status of the feedback provider than they would to the actual feedback. So one example of this is the instructor feedback. We had 3 levels of reflection that students exhibited. In the lowest level, students would literally ignore everything the peers said and just do the instructor suggestions. In the second level, students would at least not acknowledge if the peers and the instructor disagreed, but they didn't have any sort of discussion about why that disagreement occurred. They would just say, well, the instructor said so, let's do that. In the third level, students were actually able to discuss why the peers and instructors disagreed and find a next step that acknowledged the reason behind both sides. The team leader also had some power and often would implement the ideas they were happy about without consensus from their team. We also wanted to evaluate the reflection protocols that we designed. So we noticed that students preferred the interactive protocol, and in fact, no teens chose the active protocol, even though just reading the feedback and talking about it is what they would have normally done without a researcher intervention. We also found that students valued time to reflect individually before the group discussion began. That wasn't something that they normally would have given themselves, and they really appreciated that. In general, students liked the ratings and the next steps and recognized that these tools helped them prioritize. But we had pretty strict time limits on student discussion time, and they noticed. Some of them loved it. They felt it was a forcing function to get them to be more efficient. And some of them hated it. They wanted to talk forever and ever and felt that more time would make it more effective. So we discussed some really awesome things in the paper that I don't have time to dig into here. So I'll just speak for one moment about our implications for future systems. We found 2 ways to help students prioritize and interact with ratings and next steps, but there are certainly other ways to achieve those goals. We found 2 procedural recommendations that future reflection systems could benefit from, and we found 2 areas that future work would want to explore and design more effective activities for. So please ask questions and send us feedback. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you.